Good morning to you and a very happy Easter to you if I haven't seen you already, and a warm welcome to Pen Vicarage on this Tuesday morning. Lovely to see you. I hope you had a lovely Easter and thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you also to my friends and colleagues for the reflections that they gave us over the Easter couple of weeks as well. I hope you've enjoyed those reflections on John's Gospel. Today, friends, we are starting a new book in the Bible, and as it's the season of Easter, I thought now will be a good time to look at the book of Joshua. Joshua is the fifth book of the Old Testament. You have what's called the Law or the Pentateuch: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Then you move on to a completely different change now on the book of Joshua. Now, to set the scene, what's happened so far? God's people have been slaves in Egypt, and then under the leadership of Moses, they'd been set free. They'd gone away across the Red Sea, and they spent 40 years in the desert. Sometimes it had gone well, quite a lot of the time it hadn't. And finally, just when they were literally within sight of the promised land, Moses dies at a place called Mount Nebo. I've actually been there. It's in modern day Jordan, and you could literally see the promised land from the top of it, and Moses dies literally within sight of it. Anyway, book of Joshua picks it up immediately after that. So without further ado, Joshua and chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, "My servant Moses is dead. Now proceed to cross the Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I'm giving to them, to the Israelites. Every place that the sole of your foot will tread upon I have given to you, as I promised to Moses. From the wilderness and from the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, to the great sea in the west shall be your territory. No one shall be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you have put this people in possession of the land that I swore to their ancestors to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to act in accordance with all the law that my servant Moses commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, so you may be successful wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart out of your mouth. You shall meditate on it day and night, so you may be careful to act in accordance with all that's written in it. For then you shall make your way prosperous, and then you shall be successful. I hereby command you, be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, "Pass through the camp and command the people, prepare your provisions. For in 3 days you are to cross over the Jordan to go and take possession of the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess." To the Reubenites, the Gadites, to the half tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, "Remember the word that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, 'The Lord your God is providing for you a place of rest, and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your livestock shall remain in the land that Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But all the warriors among you shall cross over armed before your kindred, and shall help them, until the Lord gives rest to your kindred as well as to you, and they too take possession of the land that the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to your own land and take possession of it, the land that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan to the east." They answered Joshua, "All that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you, as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your orders and disobeys your words, whatever you command shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous." And this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Okay, Joshua in chapter 1. So let's look firstly in verse 1 a little bit about Joshua, who Joshua is. Firstly, Joshua has already been mentioned in the Bible, and principally in the book of Numbers. They were considering going into the promised land in the book of Numbers, chapter 13 and 14, and a whole group of spies were sent out. And most of them came back saying, no, you don't, the people there are big there, and it's been very difficult, you're never going to take that. But Joshua and another guy called Caleb, who himself was not a pure Israelite stock, came back and said, don't be afraid, because God's with you and it'll be fine, and so on. And they've been helped by a woman called Rahab and so on. And Joshua and Caleb have come up with a much more courageous instruction, which is that in God's strength, you'll be able to take the land. So Joshua's mentioned there. His original name was Hoshea, which means salvation. And in Numbers and chapter, where is it? Numbers and chapter 13, verse 16, Moses changes his name from Hoshea, which means salvation, to Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Interesting enough, Joshua, of course, is the same meaning as the word Jesus. If you go into more in Arab countries these days and so on, countries in the East, they often describe Jesus as being Yeshua, which is very, very similar. So Joshua was originally Hoshea, which means salvation. That gets changed to Joshua, which means the Lord saves. Okay, so he has been mentioned already. He's also almost always described as being the Moses' assistant. Now, it's quite interesting here because what becomes about Joshua is clearly a spirit-filled man. He is described as being filled with the spirit of wisdom in Deuteronomy and chapter, beg your pardon, where is it? By full of wisdom. Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 9, he's described as being spirit-filled. So, like all good leadership, he's filled with the spirit of God, with the spirit of wisdom. On the other hand, it's different to Moses, because Moses is usually called Yahweh's assistant or Yahweh's friend or something like that. Joshua is usually described as being Moses' assistant. It changes a bit, but he is a different character to Moses. So the point I'm making is that Joshua is spirit-filled, like Moses was spirit-filled, but they were different. Moses had a different role to Joshua. And in a sense, that tells us a lot about leadership, about the Christian leaders should be filled with the Spirit of God, but inevitably they're all different. And different leaders are required in different situations and different contexts. And Joshua's required a different skill to what Moses required, and so on. So you both have spirit-filled people, but again, they may have the same spirit in them, but they are different. And that's really important when it comes to consider about Christian leadership in God's church and so on today. The leaders should all be spirit-filled, but they don't all have to be the same. Thank God, dare I say. Then in verse 2 to 5 of this, you have the instructions to go and arise. In other words, there's instruction there by God, because God has told them where to go. And what's quite interesting here is in verses 2 to 5, is that you have God's initiative. God says, every place that you set your foot will tread upon, I've given to you, and so on. So interesting here that it is the Lord's initiative. The Lord provides, but nonetheless, it requires a human response. So it's the Lord's initiative. God has given the land, but Joshua and his friends have got to go and possess it. And I think that's just quite interesting today when we think about what Jesus has done for us on the cross and the resurrection and so on. The Lord has provided the salvation, but he then says, come unto me. The Lord, it's got us what God has done, but we have to make a response to it. And here it says, the Lord has given you the land, but you have to arise and go and possess it. So you have the Lord's initiative, but human response, which is required and similar to today. Then in verses 6 to 11, you hear these words again and again and again. I think 3 times is be strong and courageous. In the words of the Christian song, which I used to just a lot when I was a kid, be bold, be strong, for the Lord your God is with you. A lot of that. I think 3 times it said, do not be frightened or dismayed. Be strong, be courageous. And why can we be strong and courageous? Why do we not have to be afraid? Because the Lord your God is with you. And that is absolutely true today too. We do not need to be frightened. And I do actually think, as Christian churches and as Christians and as the Christian church, we could be, and I believe we really should be, considerably more courageous, because whatever comes towards us, God is with us. Be bold, be strong, for the Lord your God is with you. And I really do think that whilst it's right to be understanding, it's right to be sympathetic, it's right to be caring and compassionate, and all the things which we're supposed to be, actually I do think there's a message here that we do as a church need to remember, because God is with us, we can be much more bold and much more courageous, and we do not need to be afraid. As I keep saying, what does God say more than anything in the Bible? Do not be afraid. And with God with us, I believe we can be a lot more courageous in what we do as Christians and as churches and as the church too. Interesting also, he's also told, though, not only have they got to be bold and courageous, they've also got to meditate on the law day and night, to meditate on God's word. Now, interesting actually, because the word meditate comes from Hebrew as to meditate. Actually, it's a better translation is murmur, which puts it rather different. Meditate kind of implies a private thing that you kind of people are having little quiet times or meditation times or whatever. Murmur is much more of a public thing. It's much more like a Bible study. It's more like getting together to look at the scriptures. So it's not just something we do on our own. It's something that we do together. And with that in mind, I do encourage you to continue to listen to talks like this, but also to be part of Bible studies and opportunities to discuss God's word as well. So I think that's absolutely vital too. Because meditate is not a total translation. A better translation is murmur, which means to talk about it. We should talk more about God's word and so on. So as this moves on here, Moses has died and Joshua takes over. Interesting that Joshua is a spirit-filled leader, but nonetheless a very different leader to Moses. And that he's been strong and courageous in the past, and that's how he takes over here. He's spirit-filled like Moses was, but a different person to Moses. Then you have the importance of God's initiative. The Lord, the land has been given to you, but human response, that we need to respond. So Jesus gives us the gospel. He gives us salvation, but we have to respond similarly. So God's initiative, but our response is required too. Then you have the importance of being strong and being courageous. Why? Because the Lord your God is with you. And we can learn from that today to be more courageous and strong because God is with us. But also to meditate and remain faithful to God's word. But it isn't just something we do on our own, but it's something we do together. Friends, I hope you found that helpful. I hope you're going to enjoy the book of Joshua in the next few days. God bless you. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely day. Enjoy your Tuesday.